Welcome back to the deep dive. And I have to say right off the bat, today is going to be a little different. Usually when we look at a topic, we're looking at one specific lane, we look at history, or we look at tech, or we look at philosophy. But today,
Yes, there's a bit of a mashup.
yeah, a massive mashup. We are trying to merge three things that I am pretty sure have never been in the same room together before. We are talking about evolutionary biology.
Right.
We are talking about field hockey.
Mm.
And we are talking about theology.
It really sounds like the start of a bad joke, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
a biologist, a hockey player, and a theologian walk into a bar.
Walk into a bar, exactly. But the source material we are covering today, which is a deep dive into the Quranic commentary of Ghulam Ahmed Perwez, it argues that you actually can't understand one without the others. Or at least you can't understand the human condition without seeing how these systems overlap.
Systems is definitely the key word there. We are looking at a thinker who views faith not just as a list of do's and don'ts, but as a rigid biological and sociological framework. It's almost an engineering perspective on the human soul, which is fascinating.
It is. And to get us started, I really want to throw a concept at you that stuck with me from the reading. I'm calling it the evolutionary paradox.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, look at the human species. In the material world, we were completely obsessed with progress. I mean, we went from stone tools to bronze, to iron, to silicon.
Right, the whole trajectory of human invention.
Exactly. We walked on the moon, we split the atom. If I tried to sell you a medical textbook from the year 1000 to treat your migraine, you'd just laugh at me.
I would probably report you for malpractice, honestly.
Right. Because we demand the new in science. We demand the new in technology. But, and here's the wall we hit, the source argues that when it comes to our social lives, our religious lives, or our moral frameworks, we do the exact opposite.
We freeze.
We freeze. We are terrified of the new. We treat our beliefs like fragile antiques, and we put them in a museum behind glass. So you end up with this modern human who is driving a Tesla but operating on social software that hasn't been updated in 1,000 years.
It's a complete bifurcation of the human personality. You have
Yeah.
one foot slamming on the accelerator of history.
Right.
Technology, science, medicine.
Yeah.
And the other foot is just slamming on the brake of tradition. And Perez's argument, which we're going to unpack today, is that this tension isn't just unfortunate, it is fatal.
Fatal, like literally.
Yes. He argues that if you stop evolving intellectually, you don't just stay still. You actually begin to devolve. You actively lose your humanity.
That is a really heavy claim. But, as I went through these notes, I realized he isn't saying this to be mean or provocative. He's saying it like a doctor giving a clinical diagnosis.
Precisely. It is a clinical observation of a societal disease.
So, here is our mission for this deep dive. For you listening at home, we are going to break down this architecture of reason. We are going to look at why Perwez thinks blind faith actually dehumanizes people, turning them into sheep. And he means that in a very literal behavioral sense. We're going to explore this hockey match metaphor for divine law, which, frankly, completely changed how I look at rules.
That's a brilliant metaphor.
It really is. And we are going to talk about the use it or lose it principle, which is where the biology actually comes in.
And I think by the end of this, you as the listener are going to have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Are you playing the game of life, or are you just a statue standing in a museum?
Let's start right there with that museum concept. This is the diagnosis part of the framework. Perwez looks at religious society, and honestly, the sources make it clear this applies to any dogmatic society, and he identifies a core disease. He calls it taqlid.
Taqlid, yes.
Now, we see this word all over the notes. Break it down for us. What exactly is taqlid?
So taqlid is often translated simply as imitation or blind following. But if you look at the etymology, the actual root of the word, it's much more visceral than that. It comes from a root meaning to put a collar around the neck.
Oof.
A collar.
Like a dog.
Like a domestic animal, yes. It implies being led. It implies that the creature with the collar has totally surrendered control of its direction to someone else who is holding the rope.
That paints a very specific, almost disturbing picture. So when we talk about taqlid in a religious or a social context, what does that practically look like?
It's the mindset that says, I hold this belief or I perform this ritual simply because my father did it.
Right.
And he did it because his father did it.
Right.
It is the absolute refusal to ask why. It's the acceptance of authority solely based on the fact that the authority is old or ancestral.
So it's the idea that the past is automatically superior to the present no matter what.
Exactly. And Perwez uses a metaphor that I think is brilliant to describe societies that get stuck in this mindset. He calls them museums.
The museum metaphor. Now, hang on, because I actually like museums. I pay good money to go to them on the weekends. Why is being a museum a bad thing in this specific context?
Well, think about the function of a museum. What is it actually for? It is a place where we preserve things that are dead.
Okay, that's a fair point.
You walk into a museum and you see pottery from 4,000 years ago. You see swords that are never going to be swung again. You see clothes that no one will ever wear. Everything is behind glass.
Yeah.
It is preserved exactly as it was.
Right. If the curator came in and started, painting new modern designs on the ancient Greek pottery, he'd be fired instantly. The whole point is that it doesn't change.
Correct. Perfection in a museum means stasis. It means zero change. But Perwez asks the critical question here. Is that how a society should function? Is that how a human mind should function?
I see where you're going with this. If a society is a museum, it means they're just guarding the ashes of their ancestors.
They are guarding the artifacts. And because of that, they become completely insulated. The world outside the museum is changing rapidly. New technologies, new social challenges, new economic realities.
Yeah.
But inside the museum, the air is just stale. The people inside are terrified to touch anything or move anything because they might break the tradition.
It creates a total disconnect from reality. You're just living in a bubble.
It is a bubble that suffocates you. Perwez argues that when you choose Caclid, when you choose the museum, you are effectively resigning from the present moment. You are trying to live in a time that literally no longer exists.
And this leads us to the sheep and goat metaphor from the sources, because if you aren't using your brain to navigate the present reality, what are you using?
You are using instinct. And this is where Perwez gets very sharp with his criticism. He argues that the defining characteristic of a human being, the one thing that makes us distinct from the rest of the animal kingdom, is our intellect. It's our capacity for insight.
For reflection.
The ability to process information and actually make a choice based on it. Right. Because animals don't really make choices in that complex sense. They follow drives. A flock of sheep follows the shepherd. Or, more often, they just follow the sheep directly in front of them.
The herd mentality.
But look at the actual mechanics of it. The sheep in the back isn't looking at the road. It isn't checking a map.
Right. It's just staring at the tail of the sheep in front of it.
Exactly. It assumes the sheep in front knows where it is going.
And if the sheep in front walks off a cliff,
the flock follows. Not because they have a death wish, but because they have surrendered their faculty of navigation. Perwez references this imagery to describe religious followers who simply say, well, the holy man said so, or the scholar said so.
They're just following the tail in front of them.
They are. And Perwez argues that when a human being, a creature that has the capacity to calculate the orbit of Mars, to write poetry, to analyze history, when that human being voluntarily chooses to act like a sheep, that is a crime against their own nature.
Which connects to a phrase in the source material that really jumped out at me. It quotes older scripture describing these people as the worst of creatures.
Yeah.
And when I first read that, I thought, wow, that is incredibly harsh. It sounds so judgmental.
It does sound harsh if you read it as an insult. But Perwez doesn't read it that way. He reads it as a classification.
How so? Like a biological classification?
Sort of. The source cites the description of these people as deaf, dumb, and blind. Now, obviously these people aren't physically deaf or blind. Their ears pick up sound perfectly well. Their retinas process light.
So it's not a physical disability at all?
No. It is a functional refusal. Think about it. A cow cannot reflect on the origins of the universe. It doesn't have the hardware for it. So a cow is completely blameless for not doing astrophysics.
Right.
But a human has the hardware. A human has the eyes of intellect. If a human chooses to close those eyes and act like a cow, that is a degradation. That is why they are called the worst. Because they are squandering a potential that the animal never even had to begin with.
It's the waste of it all. It's like having a supercomputer on your desk and only using it as a paperweight.
Exactly. And this mindset, this ancestor worship, it leads to behaviors that are logically absurd. Perwez uses humor to show this, actually. Did you catch the story in the notes about the baker?
Oh, yes. I loved this part. It was such a weird little anecdote, but it makes the point perfectly. Let's set the scene for the listener.
So imagine a bakery. The baker has 2 piles of bread on his counter. One pile is fresh, hot, just came out of the oven this morning. The other pile is stale, hard, dry bread from yesterday, or maybe the day before.
And basic market logic would dictate the fresh bread costs more.
Of course, it's a better product. But in this story, the baker sells the fresh bread for a nickel and the stale bread for a dime. It is twice as expensive.
And when the customers inevitably ask why on earth they would pay more for the bad bread.
He tells them this bread is older, it is closer to the ancestors, it has history.
And the scary thing is, in the metaphor, the people actually buy the stale bread.
They line up for it. Because in the mindset of Taclid, old automatically equals holy, and new automatically equals suspect. It perfectly illustrates how the critical faculty has just completely shut down. If you applied that logic to your groceries, you would die of food poisoning.
Right.
But people apply it to their core beliefs every single day without a second thought.
This brings us to what the sources call the spell of names. The idea that we get hypnotized by authority figures from the past.
It's a psychological bypass switch. If I come to you with a new idea, say a brand new economic theory, you will ask me for data. You will critique it. You will debate me on the merits of it.
Right. I'd want proof before I just believed you.
But if I come to you and say, this is what the great Imam so-and-so said 1,000 years ago, or this is the unquestioned tradition of our forefathers, suddenly, for the person stuck in Taclid, the critical brain just turns off.
It's like the name itself carries a force field. You aren't allowed to touch it or question it.
Precisely. Perwez argues that people end up worshiping mere names and graves. They bow down to the monument of the person, but they completely ignore the actual intellectual contribution that person made. They value the container, not the content.
Okay, so we have the diagnosis laid out. The patient is living in a museum, acting like a sheep, and voluntarily eating stale bread because they are terrified of anything new. That is a pretty bleak picture of society.
It is bleak. But Perwez doesn't just complain about it. He offers a solution. And this is where we shift from sociology to biology.
Right. The cure for Taclid. The source material introduces a new concept here called tadabbur.
Yes, tadabbur.
Now, we defined Taclid earlier as the collar around the neck. How do the sources define tadabbur?
Tadabbur is the direct antidote. It roughly translates to active, intense reflection. It implies looking deeply at the end results of things. It is independent, rational, critical thinking applied to scripture and to life in general.
So it's not just passively reading a text, it's actively analyzing it.
It's processing it. And Perwez argues that this isn't just a polite recommendation. It isn't just extra credit for the smart people in the room. He argues that tadabbur is a biological imperative. This is the use it or lose it section of his framework.
This part, I have to be honest, this part gave me the creeps a little bit when I was prepping. It felt like something straight out of a sci-fi horror movie.
It is very sobering. Perwez draws a direct, literal parallel to evolutionary biology. He talks about the phenomenon of cave animals.
Like those blind fish you see in nature documentaries that live down in the Mariana Trench or in deep underground caves.
Exactly, or blind salamanders. Evolutionary biology tells us that millions of years ago, their ancestors actually had working eyes. They could see. But then they migrated into total pitch black darkness.
And because there was absolutely no light, they just stopped using their eyes.
And what did nature do in response? Nature is ruthless when it comes to efficiency. Nature said, you are expending valuable caloric energy to maintain an organ you are not using. That is wasteful. So over generations, the eyes just atrophied.
Skin literally grew over them.
Yes, the optic nerve disconnected.
So they didn't just stop seeing, they physically lost the anatomical capability to see.
Correct. And Perwez takes this hard biological fact and applies it directly to the human mind. He argues that the human intellect is an organ, just like the eye.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If a society spends centuries in the darkness of the museum, if they spend generations refusing to use their critical thinking, refusing to question, refusing to analyze,
The mind atrophies.
the mind atrophies. The eye of the heart goes completely blind. And Perwez argues that when ancient texts talk about locks on the hearts, or people who, quote-unquote, cannot understand, it isn't describing some magical curse from an angry god.
Right, it's not God zapping them with a stupidity ray from the sky.
No. It is a natural consequence. It is basic cause and effect. You refuse to think, so now you literally cannot think. You have become the cave fish.
That is terrifying, because it implies that ignorance isn't just a lack of information that you can fix by reading a book. It's structural damage to the self.
It is self-mutilation. And this is why Perwez is so incredibly adamant about the difference between humans and animals regarding how we interact with time.
The accumulative knowledge concept.
Yes. Think about the goat again. A goat born today, in the 21st century, lives exactly the same life as a goat born 4,000 years ago. It eats the same grass, It makes the exact same sounds. It operates on the same social structure.
Right. Goats didn't have a renaissance. Goats didn't go through an industrial revolution.
Exactly. Animal life is a flat circle. It just repeats endlessly. But human life is a spiral. It moves upward. We are designed for accumulative knowledge.
We stand on the shoulders of giants.
We do. The source mentions Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. That wasn't a miracle. It was the result of thousands of years of accumulated math, physics, chemistry, and engineering. We didn't throw away the knowledge of the past, but we didn't just stare at it either. We built on top of it.
You took the wheel and eventually made it a tire. We took fire and we made an internal combustion engine.
Precisely. And Perez asks a really cutting question here. Why do we accept this accumulation in science, but entirely reject it in faith?
That's the evolutionary paradox again.
He argues the true faith, what the sources call Dean, requires this exact same accumulation. It isn't static. The world changes. We face bioethics questions today that literally did not exist in the 7th century.
Right.
We face artificial intelligence. We face climate change. We face massive global economic interdependence.
And you can't solve those complex modern problems with a hyper-specific rule book written for a small village in the ancient past unless you know how to adapt the underlying principles.
Exactly. If you just repeat the literal solutions of the ancestors, you are essentially bringing a bronze sword to a drone fight. You will lose. You have to take the principles, the core ethical values, and apply Tadabur to create new solutions for the new era.
So the goal isn't to disrespect the ancestors or throw away their work. It's to actually honor them by continuing the work they started.
Beautifully put. The museum preserves the past by freezing it, which kills it. Tadabur honors the past by extending it into the future.
Okay, so we've got the diagnosis, the museum,
Yeah.
and we've got the biological imperative, use your brain or lose it. But this leads to the absolute hardest question of the entire deep dive, and this is the part I was really excited to get to.
The architecture.
The architecture. Because here is the fundamental problem. We are talking about religion here. We are talking about divine law. And usually when people hear the phrase divine law, they think of something rigid.
Unbending.
Exactly. They think of a stone tablet. Unchanging. Eternal. So how do you possibly reconcile eternal law with constant change? Those two things feel like absolute opposites. If I'm free to change things, is it still a law? And if it's a law, how am I actually free?
This is the core paradox that trips everyone up. Permanence versus change. And Perez solves this with what I honestly think is his most accessible and brilliant metaphor. The hockey match.
I really love this part. Walk us through the hockey match.
Imagine a massive sports field. It could be field hockey, ice hockey, soccer. The principle is exactly the same. What is the very first thing you need to even play a game?
Well, you need a ball. Right.
Even before the ball, you need a field. And what defines the field?
The lines, the boundary lines painted on the grass.
Exactly. The boundary lines. Perez equates divine revelation, the core scripture, to these boundary lines.
Okay, so these lines are the permanent limits.
Yes. These are the ethical absolutes. Do not kill, do not steal, do not exploit the vulnerable, protect the weak, establish justice. These lines do not move. They are the permanents.
Right, because you can't just decide in the middle of a soccer match, hey, I'm going to run into the parking lot with the ball and score a goal over by the hot dog stand.
No, you can't. If you leave the field, you are no longer playing the game. The lines create the very space where the game exists. Without lines, it's not a sport. It's just a mob running around a park.
Okay, so the law provides the fundamental structure. It defines the game itself.
But now, and this is the crucial part, look inside the lines. Who is on the field?
The players.
And what are the players doing? Are they following a rigid script?
No. I mean, they have a general strategy, but they have to react to whatever is happening.
Exactly. Imagine if the team captain, or in this theological metaphor, God gave the players a script written 1,000 years ago. Imagine the script says, at minute 4, second 12, player A must pass the ball exactly 3 feet to the left.
That would be a complete disaster.
Yeah.
Because the opposing team might be standing right there.
Exactly. The situation is totally dynamic. The opposing team moves. The weather changes. The ball bounces weirdly on a patch of dirt.
Yep.
If the player is just a robot following a pre-recorded script from centuries ago, the team loses horribly.
You'd get crushed. You have to think on your feet in real time.
You have to think on your feet. And this is Perez's massive breakthrough. He argues that inside the boundary lines, within the four walls of the permanent law, human beings have absolute freedom.
Absolute freedom. Those are strong words.
Absolute freedom to use their intellect, their judgment, and their creativity to play the game in the present moment. The law doesn't tell you how to pass the ball. It doesn't tell you what formation to run. It just tells you where the boundaries are.
This is a massive reframing of theology, because I think most people view religious law as a set of tight chains. Don't wear this specific fabric, don't eat that specific food, make sure you step into a room with your right foot and not your left foot.
Right, they view it as cosmic micromanagement.
But Perez is saying the law isn't a chain at all, it's a safe space.
It is the playing field. Think of it like gravity. Gravity is a fundamental law. It is a boundary. You absolutely cannot ignore it.
But does gravity dictate how you dance?
No.
Does gravity tell an engineer exactly how to design an airplane wing? No. But you can only dance and you can only build airplanes within the overarching context of gravity. It provides the physics that makes the action possible in the first place.
So if I'm understanding this right, Perez is saying that God wants players. He doesn't want robots.
He wants athletes of the mind. He wants humanity to develop its full potential. If God wanted robots who just repeated the exact same words and actions over and over again, he could have created a tape recorder. But he created humans.
I really like that phrase, athletes of the mind. It implies that being a deeply religious person isn't about being passive or submissive in an intellectual sense. It's about being incredibly active. You have to be skilled and trained to play the game well.
And you have to adapt to the era you are playing in. If the game gets faster, you have to get faster. If the intellectual challenges get harder, you have to get smarter. That is the change aspect of the paradox. The field of law is permanent, but the play of the life is constantly evolving.
This sounds, frankly, it sounds great. It sounds incredibly liberating. It gives you the psychological security of the truth, right, the boundary lines, but it also gives you the excitement and purpose of progress, which is the game.
Yes.
So why on earth is there so much resistance to this?
Now we finally get to the human psychology part of the equation. Because if you look at history, and Perez points this out extensively in the texts, whenever someone comes along and says, hey guys, let's actually think about this tradition before we do it, they usually get rocks thrown at them.
Oh, much worse than rocks.
So why? If the hockey match is such a vastly superior model to the museum, why do people fight so viciously to defend the museum?
Perez identifies a few key reasons. The first is what the sources translate as the crow reaction.
The crow, like
Yeah.
the actual bird.
Yes. He uses this specific nature imagery from the source.
Mhm.
He says, when a new thought is presented, something that actually challenges the stagnant status quo, the society doesn't respond with a reasoned counter-argument. They don't write a detailed paper refuting the new idea.
What do they do instead?
They just make noise.
Mm.
Like a massive flock of crows or sparrows taking off from a tree all at once. Cow! 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 It's just a cacophony of pure outrage.
That is, I think I've seen that exact dynamic on social media today.
It is the universal sound of the mob throughout all of human history. And notice the actual content of the noise. The accusation is rarely, hey, your logic is mathematically flawed.
No, it's usually, how dare you?
Exactly. You are insulting the elders. You are misguiding the youth from the path of our fathers. Who do you think you are to question the great names of the past? It is an emotional defense mechanism, not a rational one.
It's the immune system of the museum attacking a foreign object.
That is a perfect way to describe it. But there is a deeper, more insidious reason for the resistance, beyond just emotional attachment to the past. It's laziness.
Laziness, just plain old laziness.
Intellectual laziness. Thinking is hard work. Tadaber is mental labor. It is exhausting to constantly evaluate your beliefs, to check the facts of your reality, to adjust your worldview when new evidence comes in. It is much, much easier to just follow.
It's the path of least resistance.
Perez talks about a group the sources call the mutrafine. It's a term for the affluent, the comfortable, or the indulgent people in a society. These are people who heavily benefit from the status quo. They don't want the boat rocked because they have the best seats on the boat.
Sure.
But it also applies to the everyday intellectual laziness of the average person.
It's the stale bread thing again. It's just easier to buy the stale bread from the baker than to go home and mill the flour and bake your own fresh loaf.
Exactly. And this dynamic creates a very specific type of social hierarchy. Perez distinguishes between two types of people in this system: the cataloger and the scholar.
Oh, I highlighted this in the notes. The cataloger versus the thinker.
Right. So, in a stagnant society inside the museum, who is the most respected intellectual?
The guy who knows the most stuff by heart. The guy with the
I think
photographic memory.
The cataloger, the librarian, the person who can tell you, oh, that specific rule is written in volume 4, page 20, line 6. He knows exactly where everything is located. He is a walking encyclopedia of the ancestors' rulings.
He's basically a human hard drive.
He is a hard drive. And society loves him because he is incredibly safe. He preserves the data without changing it. But Perwez argues forcefully that this person is not a scholar in the true sense of the word.
Because he doesn't know why the rule exists.
Exactly.
Right.
He knows the what, but he doesn't understand the why or the how. The true scholar, the thinker, is the one who can actually connect the dots. The one who can look at the text and say, yes, that rule was written on page 20, but why was it written? What was the socioeconomic context at the time? And most importantly, how does the spirit of that rule apply to us today in a totally different world?
But that guy, the thinker, he is dangerous.
He is incredibly dangerous to the museum because he might come to a logical conclusion that requires the society to change. He might say, hey, this rule was instituted during a time of famine and war, but we are in an era of peace and abundance, so we shouldn't apply it the same way anymore.
And the cataloger immediately steps in and says, heresy, you are changing the sacred books.
Exactly. The conflict between the cataloger and the thinker is the eternal conflict between memory and reason. And Perwez is firmly, unapologetically on the side of reason.
Okay, so we've mapped out the entire battlefield here. We have the Museum of Stagnation versus the architecture of reason. We have the comfort of the crowd versus the hard labor of the individual thinker. What is the ultimate end game here? Why does this matter beyond just having a better philosophical debate?
It matters because, according to Perwez and the sources we're analyzing, this is the entire purpose of human existence.
That's a massive statement.
It is. We have to completely redefine what true faith dean means in this framework. It is not a ritualistic repetition of the past to appease an angry deity. It is not a mechanism for freezing time.
It is a mechanism for evolution.
Yes. Faith is the engine of human evolution. Perwez argues that humanity's divine purpose is discovery and improvement. We are here to expand the universe of knowledge.
So God provides the principles, the boundary lines of the hockey rink, but we have to provide the actual movement on the ice.
We are active partners in the project. If we stop moving, the project fails. And this leads to the darkest part of his theory, but honestly also the most realistic part when you look at history.
The ruins.
The ruins. Perwez looks at world history, the rise and fall of great civilizations over millennia. And he asks a simple question. Why do great civilizations collapse?
And his answer isn't bad luck, it's stagnation.
His answer is that they flat out refuse to evolve. They stuck stubbornly to the ways of their forefathers when the physical world changed around them. They kept using bronze weapons when their neighbors figured out iron. They kept using insular tribal laws in an era that required complex imperial administration.
And history didn't just pat them on the head and say, oh, that's okay, you guys are just sticking to your cute traditions.
No, history crushed them without mercy. They were completely destroyed. They became irrelevant. And now, what are they? They're literal museums. We go and visit the ruins of their temples as tourists on vacation.
That is a genuinely chilling thought. The metaphor becomes literal reality. If you insist on living your life in a mental museum, your society ends up becoming a physical museum exhibit for the people who actually did evolve.
It connects everything perfectly back to that biological imperative. Use it or lose it. It applies to the optic nerve of a tiny cave fish, and it applies to the survival of a global human civilization. The mechanics are the same.
So this isn't just an abstract theological debate about being smart. It's fundamentally about survival.
It is. Stagnation is death. Movement is life. That is the ultimate summary of this entire worldview.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot to process. But it's a framework that really makes sense of the modern world. Let's try to synthesize this for the listener. If we had to put this entire deep dive on a Post-it note, a very large Post-it note, what are the three key takeaways?
I think we break it down into the three layers we just discussed. So layer one is the warning. Tackle it as the museum. It is the animal state of brain following. It feels incredibly safe because you don't have to think, but it inevitably leads to atrophy and death. Layer two is the tool. Tadabbur is the engine. It is the active, strenuous use of the intellect. It is the refusal to let your mind rot. It is the fundamental biological requirement of being human.
And layer three?
Layer three is the structure. Divine law is the hockey rink. It provides the ethical boundaries that make the game of life possible, but it explicitly demands that you use your absolute freedom to actually play the game.
And the big shift for me, the real aha moment of this whole deep dive, is the realization that questioning things isn't the enemy of faith.
Not at all. In this view, questioning is the literal act of faith. If you aren't questioning, you aren't thinking. If you aren't thinking, you aren't using the greatest tool you were given You're essentially rejecting the gift.
That's incredibly powerful. It completely changes the definition of what a pious person is. The pious person isn't the one sitting in the corner with the quietest mind, just repeating old phrases. It's the one with the most active, questioning mind.
The one who is sweating on the field, playing the game, trying to figure out the next move.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We've talked a lot today about the game in the museum. So, look at your own life right now. Look at your core beliefs, your daily routines, the things you do at work or the traditions you keep with your family, the things you accept as, just the way it is. Ask yourself, am I doing this because it actually works? Am I doing this because I've thought about it and I know it's true? Or am I just doing this because it's what the person standing in line before me did? In other words, are you playing the game or are you just a statue standing in the museum?
That really is the question that decides the future, isn't it?
It really is. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.